שמי מירב כהן, ואני מנהלת תוכניות בתחום מנהיגות מתנדבת, הג'וינט. נמצאות כאן איתי קולגות שלי, גם אסנת חזן, שעוד מעט תיקח את ההיגוי ותיתן ככה תקציר מנהלים של המודל של הילדי, אבל בעברית, ונמצאת פה גם רונית לוי, ראש התחום של מנהיגות מתנדבת. אבל שנייה לפני שאנחנו ממשיכים, הילדי ביקשה בקשה קטנה, שכל אחד יכתוב בצ'אט, בעברית, באנגלית, איך שנוח לו, איזשהו משהו מעורר טוב שקרה לו בתקופה האחרונה, או היום אפילו, ותקדישו לזה טיפה זמן ותשלחו לנו בצ'אט, אנחנו כמובן נתרגם אם יש צורך. תזכורת למי שלא מכיר את הפורום, למרות שאני חושבת שפה כולם מכירים, הוא נולד במאי 2019, זה חלק מהתפיסה שלנו במנהיגות מתנדבת, להוביל את שדה הדירקטורים החברתיים, זאת הובלה מקצועית, להנגיש ידע, כלים, וליצור קהילת עמיתים לומדת. בהמשך המנכ"לים, הדירקטורים ביקשו שהמנכ"לים יצטרפו, ולכן גם המנכ"לים נמצאים פה, וזה מייצר שפה מקצועית משותפת, ואנחנו מברכים על כך. אנחנו עושים מאמץ רב לתת לקהילה את המקום להביע את קולה, וגם היום אתם תראו שיש לנו שתי דוגמאות מארגונים בתוך הקהילה, שילוו אותנו במהלך המפגש, אם זה ארגון AICEO, שזה ארגון יוצא מרכז אירופה, אז נמצאת איתנו טל קדמי, המנכ"לית, תנופפי, ואם זה ארגון החצר הנשית, Women's Courtyard, נמצאות פה גם המנכ"לית וגם היושבת ראש, אורנה לוי. אז ממש רגע לפני שאנחנו צוללים פנימה, נראה על קצה המזלג את המודל שפותח על ידינו באלקה, והמודל זה כלי, זה כמו מפה, זה ה-Waze הניהולי להתמודדות בעת משבר של דירקטורים חברתיים, ולפיו המלצנו כאן בפורום לארגונים ולדירקטורים להתנהל לאורך המשבר. אבל לאורו גם בנינו את הפורום בשנה וחצי האחרונות, ולכן רצינו למקם את עצמנו בציר הזמן של המודל, להבין איפה אנחנו נמצאים, ונראה שקצב השינויים במדינת ישראל, גם הפוליטיים, ממשלה חדשה, גם הרפואיים, קורונה שהולכת ונעלמת, אבל אולי מביאה עוד זנים חדשים והתמודדויות חדשות שיחזירו אותנו לשלבי החירום, וגם כל הנושא הכלכלי שמשפיע באופן ישיר על הארגונים החברתיים, כי אין לנו תקציב כבר מעל לשנתיים, ויש לזה השלכות על הארגונים החברתיים בעיקר. אז על פי המודל אנחנו כעת בעיצומו של שלב החזרה הזהירה לשגרה והתייצבות, ואנחנו גם נכנסים ככה בזהירות לשלב היציאה והפריצה מחדש. וזה שלב שמלווה בתשישות בארגונים, כי אנחנו אחרי שרדות, ועלול להוביל לכך שהמיקוד הארגוני יהיה תיקון בעיות, חזרה להתנהלות קודמת, לאזור של הנוחות של הארגון שלנו. אבל לתפיסתנו כמובילי דרך, אנחנו באלקה חושבים שהדירקטורים החברתיים יכולים לנצל את השלב הזה, ודווקא להביא את התקופה הזאת לדגש אחר. האתגר המרכזי הוא לא רק לפתור בעיות אקוטיות, אלא להתאתגר באומץ במחשבה, ולשאול בארגון את שאלות הבסיס. זה חלק מתהליך של שינוי פרדיגמות, וזה מלווה לאורך כל המיקודים בתפקידי הדירקטור במודל, אם זה במנהיגות, ואם זה בקבלת החלטות, ואם זה בקשר עם השותפים. זה בדיוק מביא אותנו לנושא ההרצאה היום. המפגש היום יהיה אינטראקטיבי, והוא יתבסס על שאלות שלכם כאן וההשתתפות שלכם. אני מזמינה את כולנו להעז ולשאול, ולהרגיש בנוח לשאול באנגלית, בעברית. הצוות פה, אסנת, רונית ואני נעזור להעביר את המסרים גם להילדי אם צריך. עשינו עבודת הכנה. וזהו, אני מזמינה את אסנת לקחת קדימה את ההקדמה הקצרה בעברית.
תודה רבה. ובאמת הבקשה של הילדי שנמצאת איתנו כאן היא לא דוברת עברית, אבל ככה יודעת בדיוק מה כתוב בשקפים, אז אל תחששו לחלק הזה, ומאוד מאוד ביקשה רגע לתת לכם מקום, ורגע לכתוב משהו טוב שקרה לכם, או איך אתם מגיעים לכאן למפגש עכשיו. אז תודה אבי ששיתף שסיימת קורס דירקטורים של המגזר השלישי, ורונית על הכתיבה של תחושת הצלחה על הבוקר. אני גם יכולה לשתף שאכלתי ארוחת צהריים עם המשפחה שלי, שזה משהו שעדיין ספיחי הקורונה מאפשרים באמצע השבוע לאכול ארוחת צהריים משותפת. זכיתי לרענן את הרכב הוועד המנהל באספה הכללית האחרונה, כל הכבוד שני, זה בטח, זה חתיכת דבר, שלא, גם דברים קטנים שקרו לכם היום.
אני אשתף גם, שאני זכיתי להוביל את הילד שלי עכשיו בשבועות הקרובים, הוא מסיים 12 שנות לימוד בבית ספר, הצעיר שלי, זהו, זה כולל פרום, כולל graduation, scientific graduation. I'm proud after COVID-19 that he did it.
בהחלט מעורר גאווה והתרגשות. אז הרגע הזה של רגע אחד להגיע לכאן, גם לשתף בתוך הפורום, אבל גם רגע להסתכל על עצמנו ואיך אנחנו מגיעים, הוא רגע חשוב בתפיסה שהיא מובילה, ובכלל במהלך, תסמנו לי אם יש, אם לא שומעים אותי או משהו כזה, אז תסמנו לי ואני אעבור, לפעמים יש רגע פחות טוב, זה לפעמים בעיות תקשורת, איפה שאני גרה. מחר בטוח אצליח להתחיל את היום בים, זה תקווה, זה כבר רגע טוב, זה לקוות למה יהיה מחר. ואני אציג קצת מהרעיונות, גם למי שקרא את החומרים ששלחנו, וגם למי שצפה בטד-טוק, אנחנו ממש נעשה כמה דקות של הצגה של הרעיונות המרכזיים. בעצם...
סליחה, אתם מחכים לשיתוף מכל אחד על משהו טוב שקרה לו, או שעברנו כבר את השלב הזה?
אפשר, מוזמנת.
אנחנו נשמח שתכתבי, ואנחנו...
לכתוב בצ'אט. לכתוב בצ'אט? אוקיי.
תתייחס.
תודה. והארגון שהיא גוטליב מובילה ויסדה, Creating the Future, בעצם נסמך על תהליך מרכזי שנסמך על כמה הנחות יסוד ועל כמה תחומי מדע, מתוך ההבנה שמובילים חברתיים שואפים להביא לשינוי המציאות, אבל מירב את יכולה לקדם את הדוטים רגע בשקף הזה, אבל בעולם שבו אנחנו חיים, בעולם של ווקה, נכון, של שינויים מהירים ושל אי ודאות רבה, כמו שהוכיחה השנה וחצי האחרונות, אבל גם בלי קשר אליהם, אנחנו מבינים שהשפה של חשיבה אסטרטגית שנוסדה אי שם בשדות הקרב של יוון העתיקה, היא לא תמיד עוזרת לנו ומאפשרת לנו להתמודד עם בעיות סבוכות ומורכבות כמו מיגור הרעב, או באמת התמודדות עם תנועות גלובליות ועם תופעות גלובליות כמו אלימות נגד נשים, או אפילו עם מגפה עולמית כמו הקורונה. אפילו השפה שאנחנו משתמשים בה היא מראה על אופן החשיבה התגובתי שלנו. אנחנו רוצים לפתור בעיות, לשפר את המצב, למנוע את ההידרדרות שלו אולי, וכל המילים האלה מגלמות בעצם את התפיסה שאומרת שאנחנו מתייחסים למצב הקיים כפי שהוא היום בתור נקודת המצב, וזה דומה ברמה של החשיבה הפיזיקלית, כאילו אנחנו מנסים לגלגל איזשהו כדור שלג במעלה ההר, או להפסיק את ההידרדרות שלו למטה, והרעיון הוא שאנחנו צריכים להפוך את החשיבה שלנו ובעצם להשתמש בכוחות הקיימים ובמומנטום כדי לגלגל את הכדור, להתחיל מלדחוף את הכדור שלג הזה למטה. אז השאלות המסורתיות, החשיבה הישנה זה מה הבעיות, מי המתחרים, איפה יגיע הכסף, ובחשיבה החדשה שבעצם אנחנו רוצים להוביל אליה או לשנות את התפיסה שנקראת החשיבה הקטליטית, היא בעצם מבהירה שכיוון שמה שמניע את הפעולות שלנו זה איזה שהן אמונות והנחות עבודה, והדרך הכי מהירה לשנות אותם, תעשי עוד קליק מירב, זה בעצם לשנות את השאלות. כשאנחנו משנים את נקודת המבט ושואלים בעצם באיזה עולם אנחנו רוצים לחיות, הרבה פעמים התשובות הראשונות שיגיעו, שיעלו, זה עולם בלי מחלות, עולם בלי מלחמות, אוקיי? ואנחנו רוצים לשאול עוד קצת שאלות ולשאול, אוקיי, אז איך זה ייראה כשלא יהיו מלחמות? איך זה ייראה כשלא יהיה רעב בעולם? איך זה ייראה כשנמגר את המחלה שאנחנו רוצים לשנות? ורק אז אנחנו בעצם משחררים אפשרויות של חשיבה יצירתית ועוקפים את הפחדים שלנו ואת האמונות המקבילות שלנו. כמו שאיינשטיין אמר, אנחנו לא נוכל לפתור בעיות באמצעות אותה צורת חשיבה שבה השתמשנו כשיצרנו אותם. אז החשיבה החדשה, מירב, את יכולה להעביר בבקשה, את השקופית בעצם שואלת שאלות חדשות לגבי 3 ממדים מרכזיים בארגונים החברתיים. אחד, כמו שאמרתי, לגבי המטרה, מה התוצאה הרצויה של כל מה שאנחנו עושים, בשביל מה אנחנו עושים את כל מה שאנחנו עושים, משנה מה הבעיה למה אפשרי, עם הנחת עבודה שכל דבר שיש לו התכנות פיזית בעולם הוא אפשרי. אוקיי? אם אנחנו לא נסמכים על תפיסת חסר, על מה אין, אלא על מה עוד אפשרי, עם הנחת עבודה שאומרת, אפרופו אנשים, מי הם האנשים שיושפעו מהשינוי ושיכולים להיות שותפים שלנו בלהשפיע עליו, לא רק אוכלוסיית המטרה הרגילה של הארגון שלנו, החברתי, אלא בכלל, לחשוב שביחד, אנחנו הרי יודעים שביחד אנחנו יכולים להשיג יותר מאשר לבד, אנחנו יודעים את זה בראש, אבל אנחנו לא פועלים לפי זה. והנחת העבודה שמסתתרת שאומרת, ביחד אין משאב שחסר לנו, ביחד יש לנו את כל המשאבים בעולם, עכשיו אנחנו צריכים להגדיר מי זה הביחד הזה ואיך אנחנו מגייסים אותו לטובת המטרה הזאת של העולם האפשרי הזה, ולכן החשיבה היא בעצם עוברת מחשיבה תגובתית, reacting, לחשיבה יצירתית, creating. וזו דוגמה שהוצגה גם בטד-טוק שאולי צפיתם בו, ואם לא, אז הקישור נמצא לכם בהזמנה ותוכלו לצפות בו גם אחרי המפגש שלנו היום, של המפה ושל החשיבה בעצם של ה-reverse engineering, של חשיבה מהסוף להתחלה, כמו שסטיבן קובי אמר, begin with end in mind, גם המטרה שלנו וגם להתחיל מהסוף להתחלה, איך אנחנו מייצרים, וכאן זו דוגמה שהיא נתנה של ארגון שלוחם באיידס, אבל בעצם בקרב אוכלוסייה של מבוגרים שפעילים מינית, ויש לו אתגר גדול, איך מדברים עם סבתא על מין בטוח, הם הלכו בעצם לתיאור המציאות הרצויה, ואז ניתחו לאחור מה התנאים שאנחנו צריכים כדי להגיע למצב הזה של מקום בזמן שבו כולם יוכלו לחיות יחד חיים בריאים וחיוניים, והם ניתחו בדיוק כמו שברור לנו שכדי להבעיר אש אנחנו צריכים, נכון? ניצוץ, חומר בעירה וחמצן, זה ברמה הפיזיקלית. אותו דבר, מה הם הגורמים שאנחנו צריכים כדי לייצר את העולם הזה, ואז כל אחד מהם אנחנו מנתחים ועוברים ובודקים מה צריך לקרות כדי שהוא יתממש, כדי שהוא יתקיים. ובמפגש היום אנחנו בעצם נרצה לראות דרך שאלות שלכם, דרך case studies שגם ככה דיברנו והכנו מראש עם שני ארגונים שנמצאים כמו שמירב הציגה כאן בפורום הזה, אבל גם אתם מוזמנים לשאול בצ'אט, לשאול בקול רם ולהשתתף בדיון, ואנחנו מנסים פה משהו ביחד בפעם הזאת שהוא אחר, אז תודה על השיתופים, כל הכבוד. And I will invite Hildy to the mic, and many people shared their great moments from today or from the last few days. Some of them are written in English so you can read, others were in Hebrew. And we welcome you, Hildy, to the floor.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be with you tonight. I will share what is alive for me, which is that I have my first granddaughter. And I am going to meet her because of COVID. I have not been able to meet her. She is 5 months old, and we are going on holiday with all of our children and our new baby. And this is actually my last bit of work before we leave. We'll be gone for 3 weeks, and I get to hold my baby. So I'm very, very excited about that. One of the things that I wanted to share is, just to start, why it is so important to start our meetings with a moment that's personal. Just like we did here, you all shared what is meaningful in your life, what is alive in your life. When we come into meetings, we're usually bringing into the room everything that's in our heads from what happened before. So we come into a meeting and we're thinking about the day, and we're thinking about the last meeting, and we're thinking about the email that we have to write, and we're not completely present in the room. And so by connecting with each other in a way that is personal, and it can be what is meaningful in your life. It could be, depending on the age of the group. My daughter's workplace loves to do, what is your favorite TV show? Or whatever it is that just makes you think, okay, I'm a human in this room right now. and I can leave all that stuff behind, because our brains don't naturally leave stuff behind. Our brains just keep going. And so what this does is it stops us. And says, oh, and the minute you heard granddaughter, I loved watching all of your faces. You just came alive watching me. And that's what we do. When we share with each other, we become alive as humans. And it helps us to get present. One of the other things that it does is it helps build trust. It helps build relationship. And we really can't do anything if we don't trust each other and have relationship. So I wanted to just share why we start every single meeting we do with that kind of question. What is meaningful to you today? And sometimes it's sad and sometimes it's happy, but it also helps you know where that person is at. If you say something and they go, whoa, oh, maybe they're tired. They have a new baby. They haven't slept. Or maybe they have something difficult going on in their lives. And so we just find that it's a really good way to bring us together as people, because that's all we are as people. One of the things that I have asked us not to do is to stop me at any point where you think that, that we need translating. And so I just want to make sure that everyone is understanding and everyone is clear. So I really appreciate that, Osnat, and I really appreciate both Mirav and Ronit, all of the work that we have done to bring this together. So thank you. It's been a real joy. Let's start with just a question. As you listened to Osnat and as you read the article or watched the videos, if you could share what stood out to you, what is sticking in your mind, and we'll get to questions in a minute. But first, what are the things that made you go, ooh?
I can share my thoughts about it. It's fascinating because instead of getting into localization, it's like zoom out to the global, because when you ask those kinds of questions, so it relates to so many other people that it can benefit from it.
Wonderful. Yeah, sometimes we have to zoom out to zoom in.
I would like to add something. May I?
Please.
Well, what occurred to me when I read your article and when I emailed with you is that it applies not only to organizations, it applies to regions, it applies to states, it applies to countries, it applies to the whole world. So it makes sense to start with an organization or with organizations, but I am looking for ways and means how to apply it to our country, Israel. How to apply this thinking not only to the leaders of the organizations, but also to the leaders of the country. And it will be a shame not to do it because you have a terrific model.
Wonderful. One of the things you'll also find the more you start practicing with these questions is it applies to you as a person. It is wonderful for creating your own future, and that future can be long-term or it can be deciding what you want to do this weekend. And so it really does apply both small and very, very large. Thank you, Aaron. Anyone else?
Quickly, when I watched your lectures and I read the article, I felt compelled to do it for my family. So I did a map for us as a family. It was really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that we're preparing for a trip to go see our family, And one of the things that we found just on that personal level, one of the things that we found is that when we go on vacation, we plan to have joy on the vacation. We want to be joyful while we're traveling. But the 2 weeks leading up to the vacation, we wind up fighting with each other because you're under stress, you're going to leave, what do we do? And you wind up, the lead up to the vacation, vacation's fun, but the lead up to the vacation can be very stressful. And so what my husband and I have done is we have asked, what would good look like for that 2 weeks? So not just what would good look like for the vacation, but what would good look like for the lead up to? Oh, we would have fun preparing. We would have fun packing. And what would it take to do that? And so it can be very personal, but also very meaningful. Wonderful. Anything else that stood out to you while you were watching or reading? And any questions that arose? What questions arose for you?
I have something that kind of stood with me. It seems to me like it's a muscle that you have to practice. And how do you do it and not fall back to the way we're used to, especially in crisis, go back to like our the way we think, and also how the environment can be affected. Because I can think in a certain way about the programs that we lead, but the environment is not aligned with this kind of thinking. So how do you go about that?
Great. Absolutely. The one of the interesting things about, and this is so important with COVID and coronavirus, we know that we don't want to go back to what was. We keep saying we can't go back. A lot of what made it so horrible, pardon me, is those conditions that were put in place in the past. We're all seeing that we need to go forward, but we don't know what we're going forward to. We don't have that new thing yet. And the way our brains work, we will go back to what's comfortable. And it's one of the reasons it is so important right now at this moment to start thinking differently, because the only thing we'll do otherwise is we'll go right back, because that's the only thing we know. And so this moment, that practice, that it is a muscle, Ronit. It is, we sometimes say at Creating the Future, it's a practice, not a perfect, because we are all practicing. It is a new way of thinking. If any of you have tried meditation, you know that it is, you have to remember every once in a while, oh yes, that's right, I can breathe differently, and we have to remember that because it's not our natural go-to. So you're absolutely right, it just takes practice. One of the things that I would suggest is play with these questions every morning about something. So think about a meeting you have coming up. Think about an interaction you have. It could just be a staff meeting. It could be a board meeting. And go through and ask the questions. Just take 5 minutes as you're preparing your day. It will get your brain to practice that. So what do I want this board meeting to make possible? What would a great outcome be? And a great outcome for whom? So thinking about who will be affected by our board meeting? Well, we think about the board, and we think about the staff. Who else? Oh, the people in our community. Oh, wow, yes. And who else? Maybe our volunteers, maybe our donors. And again, I'm not remembering who it was because you all moved on the screen. Mentioned before that zooming out, that context. And that's what it does. So I'm not just thinking about the board meeting. Oh, now I'm thinking about all the people that will be impacted by the board meeting. So it's just practice. You start and you say, okay, so what do I want this board meeting? What do I want the outcome to be for the board and for the staff? But you're just practicing with something every morning. And it gets that muscle going. And you know, one day you look up and you find you're asking that question in a staff meeting and you go, oh, I remembered. And it is just that practice. And one of the things that happens is when you start asking different questions, it shifts the environment. So in answer to your question, Ronit, we are creatures of habit. And it stands out. How many times have we all been in a meeting where somebody asks, you know, the meeting is going this way, and somebody asks a question over here, and everybody goes, oh. We hear that new question, we listen to that new question, and we feel differently when we ask that question. And what you'll find is that's the way we shift environments, is we change our behavior, we change the questions that we're asking, depending on what your position is in the community. If you are an elected official, changing that question at the table when you're having conversation, changing that question when you're interviewed by the media. If you are a foundation, you can change the questions on your grant application. I mean, there's so many different ways that just hearing a different question just shifts everything. But it is amazing the power we have just to ask the question. Yeah. Other questions that arose for you?
We have two examples from the organizations, so maybe we will make a small chat.
Sure. One of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to just share one or two slides before we get started. We think about catalytic thinking as a stool with three legs. And we all know that if you have a stool and one of those legs is broken, it's going to wobble. We need the purpose, we need the people, and we need the resources. And catalytic thinking has questions about people, about purpose, and about resources. Very, very simply, when we look at the questions, there are questions about where we aim. That is the purpose. And the question we're asking here is, what do we really want? We're very good at asking, what do we not want? What is the problem? How bad is it? What is not working? But we don't generally ask, what do we really want? The second question is about all of the people who are aiming at that target. And that question is, what can we accomplish together? Together. We are, again, so encouraged to compete with each other and to think about individual organizations. But what can we accomplish together? And then the third set of questions is about resources. And that question is, what do we have together? What do we have together? When we are so used to thinking about individual organizations, we're not used to thinking about, well, we sort of think about what can we accomplish together. And then we think, but I need to get credit so that I can get funding, so that I can get volunteers. We're so used to thinking about resources as mine. And if I share those resources, you'll take my resources. And so these really are questions about what does it actually take to create a future that's different from our past. Our past is all competitive. Our past is all so rooted in what's wrong. What does it take to create that future that we want? And so, yes, let's absolutely dive in. I know that Tal had a had a question and an example from your organization.
Yes, Tal, just your name is in Hebrew, and Hildy cannot.
Oh, now I know who it is. I will know.
Yeah, just say hi.
Wonderful. Tal, can you, and if English isn't comfortable for you, if you want to speak in Hebrew, that is fine. Osnat can translate for me. What question arose for you that you're struggling with, that you're dealing with?
Because I'm going to go to a quieter place so you won't hear the background noises, and I'll answer your question in a minute.
This is part of the Zoom environment. But
It
maybe
is.
just she will tell us about the organization in 1 or 2 words, so that people that don't know her organization will understand what she's dealing with. And then from there, we can maybe practice. And you're more than welcome to bring out also other organizations that we didn't prepare. I mean, Einat if you want, or Avi, whenever, who wants to be.
So do you want me to give a general background and then say what the question is?
Yes.
Okay, so the YECAS organization is fairly old organization. The organization already exists 90 years. We are going to celebrate 90 years next year in 2022. And one of the very interesting things about this organization, that although it has been existed for 90 years, it had the sense of adapting himself each and every time and keep being relevant to a certain point in time. And this is also something that we're asking ourselves now. First of all, how relevant we are to the younger generation. I said before that most of the organization members are fairly old. The average age right now stands on, well, over 75. And yes, so it's fairly old. I am the youngest person in the organization. I'm 42. Like I'm not that young. And
can you say a little bit about what the organization does?
Yes,
what is
of
the
course.
mission? Yes.
Of course. So when the organization was established 90 years ago, it aimed to help people who came from Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia and Czechia, help them just with their aliyah to Israel. Among the years, it developed a whole social fair help to the organization members. And right now, the organization does 3 main things. So first of all, it still gives a social help and financial need for those in need. It also has, how do you say melagot in English?
Scholarship.
Scholarship. It also has scholarships. About 30 scholarships are being given every year. And the third thing that the organization does is keeping the YECAS culture with different cultural events throughout the year.
And you said that you've changed over time to be more relevant. What kinds of changes did you make, and why?
So one of the changes the organization did is from being an organization that gives only welfare help and financial help, it developed into giving scholarships, contacting the younger generation through scholarships. At some point, the organization also understands that the first generation is getting older, and someone needs to talk about the legacy of the Yekas population in Israel. So they started dealing and talking and doing events that has to do with the Yekas, legacy. And right now we're already going and talking to the third and fourth generation of the Yekas in Israel. And they're not Yekas anymore, not 100%. They are a quarter Yekas and a quarter of other things. So how do you keep being relevant to those young people?
It is a wonderful question. It is a question that many organizations face for different reasons, and especially if they've been around for a long time. I mentioned that catalytic thinking is about creating a future that's different than our past. What does it take to create a future different from our past? And that very, very first question is really so important, which is who will be affected by no matter what we do, no matter what decision we make, no matter what action we take, who will be affected, and what will it take to include them in the conversation? And so often as organizations, we think we're the smartest people in the room. We think we know the answers. We do our planning inside. We do our planning with our board and our staff. We come up with ideas for programs. We get those ideas funded. And sometimes we never talk to the community. And sometimes we only talk to the community after we've pretty much decided what we want to do. And then we go out and we say, so what do you think? Right. But they're not part of the decision. And what catalytic thinking encourages us to do is to make the decision, all of us together. And so the very, very first step being not as a token, and I don't know if that word needs to be translated, but I think it's a really important word. Osnat, would you translate that word token? Not.
Sorry, I had a power break, so I missed.
Yeah, I want to make sure that everyone understands that we're not talking about being a token conversation, a token contribution. I want to make sure everyone understands that word token.
Okay, רונית, תעזרי לי כאן.
טוקן זה כששמים משהו, מקודדים את זה, כדי שלא ידעו את המספר, זה מעולמות ה-IT.
כן, אבל הכוונה בשיחה שזה לא רק לסמן, אלא שהשיחה באמת מעמיקה ואותנטית וכנה. נכון? אני מדייקת? אוקיי.
Thank you.
All right. We found
you meant that it's not just for the sake of having it, but being authentic? Is that what you meant?
Very much. Very much. We engage people because we want them to build it. And we get very used to us being the ones to build it. I'll give you an example. There is actually in our community, I am in Tucson, Arizona, in the desert here. And the food bank here in Tucson is doing their planning. They're planning for what's next. And they are spending 6 months talking to people in the community that would potentially use the food bank, have used the food bank. They may be people that they're currently working with, they may be new people. And what they are doing is the community is going to decide what is needed. And the food bank's job is just to make that happen. And so it flips the model. We're very used to deciding what is needed and going out. We may ask people do a needs assessment to say what is needed. But to ask the questions of catalytic thinking, what would be good What would good look like for you? That relates to our mission. Just asking those questions, what do you think it would take for that to be reality? Why is it important that we remember? Why is it important to you, a 20-year-old? Why is it important that we remember? And ask them. And the more you can engage them in building it and having them answer the questions, the more relevant it will be because they are the ones building it. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah. And again, asking those questions about not what is the problem that we're trying to solve, because the problem that you were trying to solve 90 years ago doesn't exist.
That's right.
And it's one of the reasons why that aiming at what good looks like, good always exists. You know, we want to know our history. Why? What is important about that? So that we remember, okay, what is important about remembering? And one of the things, and this is along the lines of Ronit asking earlier about the muscle. Ask the same question over and over again. What is important about that? Okay, it's important to know our history. What is important about that? Why is it important to know our history? And people will tell you. And the more we can ask, and what is important about that? Why is that important? Why is that important? I want to share another slide that can help us to see problems in the context of the future. And was it Einat? Was it you that had mentioned that context, that bigger view? It's such an important thing.
Yeah, I can add for the meanwhile. Also, I come from a digital marketing world. So what you just have mentioned, we call it in the user experience, usability text, because you go to the users and you ask them and you see what are they focusing, what are their problems, what are their challenges. So.
Absolutely. And you can tell, all of us have experienced software that they didn't ask the user. And you try to use it and you wind up asking, what were they thinking? Didn't they talk to people? And so it comes out the same. I want to share with you a way of thinking about problems versus creating, reacting to problems versus creating. And I like to use math for that. One of the things that we are taught very early in school is about negative numbers, right? And we are taught that -1 + 1 is 0, right? If we eliminate something negative, we don't get 947. If we eliminate something negative, we get 0. That's what we're doing when we're solving problems. We're not aiming at +1 because you can't get there if you're just aiming at solving problems. What we're aiming at is this space right here. And here's what that means for context. We're not seeing the whole picture. We're only seeing this small part of it. And we're living in this very negative space, this very difficult negative space. But what we really want is over here. You'll remember that the question that I asked is, what do we really want? What we really want is this. So this is eliminating poverty. This is eliminating homelessness. This is eliminating illiteracy. Whoops. But what we really want isn't just to eliminate poverty. We want a world that is equitable and safe and healthy, but we don't ever talk about that. And so what we're actually doing is trying to create something positive by eliminating something negative. And the reality is it's impossible. It is, and I'm going to ask one of you to translate this right here. It is mathematically impossible to create something positive by eliminating something negative. And Ronit or Osnat, could you translate that?
מתמטית זה בלתי אפשרי ליצור משהו חיובי על ידי זה שאנחנו מבטלים את החלק השלילי. אנחנו צריכים באמת לעשות משהו אחר כדי לעבור לחיובי.
Thank you. And so what we're trying to do is actually impossible, which is why it feels so frustrating sometimes. The reality is we don't even aim for zero. What one organization, we can't possibly end poverty. And so what we'll try to do is we'll reduce poverty by 30% on this side of town with this group of people. And so what we're really saying is that we're at -5 and we'll be very happy if we get to -3. And so we're really not even aiming here. And what we need to understand is that less bad is not the same as good. We are aiming here at less bad, but this is good. And what we're going to do then is solve our problems on the way to creating what we really want. We have to solve our problems. We can't have what we really want if we don't solve our problems. But if all we do is aim here, then we're missing out on all of this here. We're not seeing the whole picture. And that whole picture is where our power is where our strength is where our joy is. And so the more we can ask those questions, again, of the people that are going to be participating, of those young people, Tal, who we're afraid are not going to be involved anymore, are not going to care, asking them that question of what does good look like? Here, let me share with you one more slide. These are some questions that you can ask in your own work. And I would ask again, Ronit or Osnat, to translate these.
אני אתרגם. What do we really want? For whom? מה אנחנו באמת רוצים? עבור מי? שקרן, אצלך זה באמת שאלה מעניינת, המי כשהדור משתנה, מי האוכלוסייה? What would good look like? What would, I'm repeating myself, איך נראה הטוב, הרצוי? What would that make possible for whom? מה זה יאפשר? עבור מי? What would our communities look like if our work were 100% successful? איך הקהילות שלנו ייראו אם העבודה שלנו תצליח ב-100%? And what would that make possible? ומה זה יאפשר? זה באותיות בולד גדולות. I asked Karen because in her organization, I don't know if she wants to share, but it just came to my thought, the whom is a big question. Or maybe I missed something. Tal, not Karen.
It's the biggest question. And one of the things that happens when we don't ask about all those people that will be affected, that is when we see unintended consequences. And it's important to translate that word, unintended consequences.
השלכות לא מכוונות, נכון? השלכות לא מכוונות. עינת מהנהנת.
Yeah, when we don't ask those questions, the reason those things happen is because we didn't ask anybody. And we'll frequently say, we never could have known. It came out of nowhere. We could have known, we just didn't ask. And so it's really important that the for whom question, you really hit it, Ronit. The for whom question is so important and involving people themselves. And Tal, the answer is they will tell you. They will tell you, especially if you're aiming at that +1, if you're aiming at what can our work right now make possible. They may tell you all the work needs to change. They may tell you none of the work needs to change, but we don't know until we ask them.
And maybe, can I ask you, Hildy, if that might be the reason why we don't ask them? Because we're afraid their answer will be, you need to change the whole focus of the organization. You don't need to invest anymore in helping the old people or preserving the culture that we don't feel part of anymore. So, but that was the reason we founded this organization, or that we keep it for 90 years. So if that's what they're going to tell us, are we going to leave the tradition altogether?
Yeah. Very, very, very observant. Very, very much so. I used to teach a lot about boards before doing the work I do right now, which is all about change. But I used to teach boards. I spent about 20 years teaching boards. And I would do a workshop with 100 people in the room. And I would ask them, spend some time at your table and talk about what the community will look like if you're 100% successful. And I did that for 20 years. And in every single one of those workshops, somebody would raise their hand and say, we might go out of business. And it never occurred to them that that might be what they want. You know, every year I get a note.
Want it, and the other part, if it fears it.
It's very scary. It's very scary. You know, every year I get a note from my food bank saying that they fed more people. I don't want to get that note. I want the note that says we didn't feed anybody because nobody is hungry. And again, you know, that's scary. That's very scary, because we've built these organizations, and we've been encouraged to build those organizations. Right now, everyone is focusing on social enterprise and encouraging build a business, build it. Well, that's the culture we live in. We live in a culture that tells us your organization is special. Your organization is important. No, your community is important. And that's a very different mindset. And it is hard sometimes, you know, and when our brains are in fear, it stops us from thinking. It's actually chemical. The chemicals that are released in our brains when we're afraid. One of the things those chemicals do is to shut down our thinking. And the reason for that, if you think about it, go back 100,000 years. The reason for that is if you're going to be eaten by a tiger, you don't want to be thinking, you want to be running away. And so the important thing is, and so our brains chemically, I know that probably, I'm trying to imagine if the political situation in Israel is worse than the US or better than the US, but we're about on par.
Don't start this competition.
Let's just say they're equal. They're horrible. They're horrible. And what politicians know is if you are afraid, you can't think. And so when you see all those commercials that scare you about what will happen if Joe is elected or Menachem is elected, and it will be horrible, that's on purpose. They know you can't think, and you are easy to manipulate if you're afraid. And so when we're thinking about, wow, our organization may not be relevant at all, or we have a $5 million budget, and maybe we really only need to be doing $1 million worth of work. Maybe we're actually going to shrink. That can be
to think, hopefully there will be no hunger and the food bank will no longer exist is kind of an optimistic thought. But then to think there won't be any yekes, and the tradition, the culture will get lost, like many languages have gotten lost in the world. That's not an optimistic thought. It's
right. Right, and that's why the answer is going to be different for everybody. That's why the question is what's important. The question is what is important. So why is it important that that history be remembered? That will lead you to the relevance. And so the difference is, you know, if you have you're an educational institution, basically, you're educating. That's very different than solving a problem. If you are an arts organization, that's very different than solving a problem. What does it make possible if there's art everywhere? Wow. Life is joyful. Life, okay, now we're talking about something very different than teaching somebody to paint. And so holding that space for, that's the context. Some people see that as optimism, but I just want to bring this slide back up again. This is the whole picture. This is not optimism and this pessimism. This is the whole picture. And what we're doing when all we look at is this part of the picture is we're just not seeing the whole picture. We're only looking at a very narrow lens. We're looking at the world like this instead of saying, wow, all of those possibilities, they exist. They're out there. We're just not looking at them. And it changes your view.
I have to mention, yesterday I watched Wonder Woman. It's now on the movies, and there was it's going on over and over again, and it says, "What do you really wish for?" So that's it. You have the slogan.
Yes. You are all now Wonder Woman.
Yeah. I'm watching the time, and maybe we can move a bit.
Let's go to Orna.
To Orna and Liron from the
Pat, thank you very much. I hope this was helpful in thinking ahead. Thanks for sharing.
Do you have any other questions, Tal, before we finish?
I don't have any other questions. I think that those 5 questions that you mentioned before are really good, and the idea of repeating the same question again and again. Why is it important? That's very interesting method of getting to understand what you're really aiming for. So thank you.
And Hildy, I think they should also define their community, because if they're looking for the young generation or the old one, we're changing the community, maybe.
Well, and again, that first question helps you to not so much define your community, but define it, who will be affected, whether you want them to be or not. And so, you know, we can target this community, but whose lives are touched by that community? And whose lives are touched by that community? So we can say we want to target young people, but the young people will affect the older people, will affect their friends, will affect their cousins in another country. I mean, once we start to think about, it's why narrowing our brains, again, the brain will naturally narrow. The brain will naturally narrow. That's why it's so important to push it out and look at that bigger picture, because we'll naturally narrow. And there's always time to narrow down. We can say, this is everybody that's going to be affected, and we want to focus on 5-year-olds. But if we don't look at that question, then again, that's that unintended consequences. That is we didn't know because we didn't ask it. And so we start big, and we can always get smaller. But it's very hard when things are very, very narrow to push people out to get it bigger. And that's why we start big.
This is a very important point, I think, because we're always looping on the narrow side.
Well, and we are taught that. If you have taken a business class, if you have taken a marketing class, they tell you narrow your focus, narrow your target, narrow, narrow, narrow. And here's what happens.
Kind of vision.
You know, and this is dangerous. this is dangerous. And so the more we can see, the more we can plan, the more we can create. It is powerful, and it's also joyful.
Absolutely. So, Orna?
Take the time with Orna? Yes.
You're on mute. Yes, now we are okay.
Hi. Liron, do you want to start about the women courtyard?
Yeah, just a little.
Hi. Okay, I'll just introduce our organization. And first, nice to meet you and nice to be here. Okay, the Women's Courtyard is a feminist organization that works with young women and girls at risk and complex life situations. And we try to help them by supervise them and give them a role model and also a place in the community which they can just be the way they are and to stay there, to eat, to have everything they need during this time when they grow and became young women. So between the age of when they're 13 to the age of 25. We have 3 like centers, courtyards in Netanya, in Haifa, and in Jaffa. And I think that our main challenge, we face a few challenges after COVID-19, but the main one is that when we try to develop resources and we try to reach for new foundations, we learn that their focus is mainly on innovation. But what we do is we do it for the past 18 years. We consider very good at what we do, but it's not new, it's not innovation, it's not innovative, and it's a problem. And we try to think about new ways and creative ways to invent our, actually what we do, and we know that we do best. We try to invent it in a new way so we could get better at this. And at the same time, our staff, which most of them are social workers, and they faced, I don't know, the term, trauma mishnit.
Secondary trauma.
Secondary trauma, because during the COVID-19, they really had to face intense cases of young women and girls, also of violence and all kinds of extreme cases that we had more this year. And what they want is mainly yatzivut. They want just
stability.
They want the things to stay as they are, and they want from us, from me as a director of the organization, to give them the environment in which they can stay in their comfort zone. And when I try to get them to be more innovative, they really get annoyed by this. So,
and this innovation, actually, the funds that didn't want to, they are looking for that, especially innovation and something unique, something different that you made versus the previous years.
It makes me crazy. I need to say, and one of the things that's interesting about all of the situations that you all are talking about is it is not just you. It is everywhere around the world. I have taught everywhere around the world, and it is amazing. We have created systems In nonprofits and NGOs, those systems come from the business world. They come from the military. Strategic planning was born by Napoleon. So we have all of these systems that make absolutely no sense. And the system you're talking about right now is the fact that people with power and money get to make the decision about what you do to try and help people who are harmed by systems of power and money. So we are in this cycle, and we wind up, very much like you described, Liron, of changing, trying to like morph into something else just so they'll give us money. And you're not alone. It's not just you. It's not just Israel. It is everywhere. And so that's just my thoughts. So I'll just start with that. There's a couple things. If you have relationships with foundations, and it's very much like what Ronit was asking before about changing the environment. If you have relationships with foundations that you can have conversation, and it's not about just so you'll get funding, but to help them move to what's possible. One of the things we're finding, because at Creating the Future, our mission is systems change. And we find that the systems that affect nonprofits make it difficult to create systems change. And the funding system is one of those systems. Foundations don't like it. They don't like the systems any more than you do. They're just following what they're told, and they're frustrated. And so they are looking for, what they really want is their dollars to have impact. They want their money to have impact. And so they come up with all these ideas. And it has to be innovative is one of those ideas. And that comes right from the business world. That comes right from we need to one of the memes in software is fail fast. Come up with something new really fast, get it out there, and if it fails, we'll know and we'll move to the next thing. And that's where that innovation comes in. The problem is if you fail in a nonprofit, people fail. It's not a software failure. It's not a profit failure. It's a people failure. So one, see if you can have some of these conversations with some foundations. And so that's, sometimes it helps and sometimes it doesn't. If it's a small foundation, just to have the conversation. Can we start thinking about a different way? The other is to start thinking about different ways to generate resources. And I mentioned that the three legs of that stool, we have people, and we have purpose, and we have resources. And the question when it came to resources, let me bring it back up again, is what do we have together? What do we have together? One of the interesting things about the focus on money, we don't really want money. What we want is what money buys us. We want the stuff that money buys us. We want cars or buildings or people, or we want that stuff. We use money to get that stuff. Money is scarce. We can't share money, but all that other stuff we can share. All that other stuff is everywhere around us, and we can share a car, we can share a building. And so one of the ways of looking at resources is to ask, what do we really need? And is somebody else doing that we can share with? So it's a different way of looking at it, but again, it builds relationships. And so it could be sharing space. It could be the fact that you have space and somebody else needs space, so you could share with them. It's not just what do we need, but what do others need that we may have. But it is looking at the real resources and looking at where those are and if we can share with them. The most important question that we can be asking as organizations, period, is how can we do our work in a way that aligns with that future that we want to see? How can we do our work in a way that aligns with that future we want to see? The problem that we face with foundations is it's the exact opposite. And especially the work that you are doing with the Women's Courtyard. Your plus one is an equitable world, a fair world, a joyful world, a safe world, where those girls don't need the courtyard, where they have each other, that kind of world. And what would it take for the way you generate resources to reflect that? What would that look like? Sometimes what it takes is building on the assets you already have. What do we have already that maybe we could generate resources from? But it is, again, looking at it from a different lens. And the more you can have those conversations with foundations, not please give us money, but look at what you're doing in the world and asking them, what do you really want? This isn't working. You know, it's the unfortunate thing of the systems that we find ourselves in. But again, catalytic thinking is not really about a way to generate resources. Catalytic thinking is really about what does it take to create the world we want? And the way we're doing things cannot create the world we want. It just doesn't. And we know the organizations have been around, you've been around for 18 years and the problems still exist. We're not creating the world we want because everything we're doing, we were taught to do, actually goes counter to it. And so the more you can align what you're doing with that future and find foundations that want to build a different future, that are talking that language. But, you know, I wish I had a magic wand. I wish I could tell you it's this, but it is a systemic thing. That and again, what our work is about, what catalytic thinking is about, is really creating something different. And the only way we can do that is to start having those conversations. It's long term. This is not going to fix it overnight, and it's not going to generate resources for you overnight. But again, it is long term. Let me also address the people, the staff question that you asked. The impact of constantly having to do something new makes everybody crazy. And it's not just because COVID made it hard. It's because we are creatures of habit. Our brains like stability. Our brains like being able to know that when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to be in the same bed I went to sleep in at night. Our brains like stability. And the constant push to change. The more we can create, and again, this is about being human. It's not about new policies. It's not about new rules. It's about the opposite of that. It's about the more we can have conversation and people can understand why, and be part of those conversations. One of the things that we have found is the best ideas about anything come from people we didn't expect. And so involving your staff in the question, and again, it's who will be affected. Involving your staff in the question, what would good look like in our workplace? And given the funding environment, what would it take for that to happen? What would you need to feel, staff? What would you need to know? What would you need? And so often staff just doesn't know. They're acting, they have this much knowledge of this much. What would it take for you to feel comfortable? And ask them. You know, it's very much like the question that we were saying with Tal before. When it comes to the staff, ask them. And be prepared. It may be uncomfortable for you for a little bit. And that's what it is to lead. But if you are leading in service to them, if you are seeing yourself as supporting your team, then ask them, what would help you? We know that the funders want innovation. We know that it is hard after COVID. What would help you feel more comfortable? It's the best I can do.
Hildy, on the last minutes maybe of our session, can you give us a small review about what's going on really in the social organizations around the world maybe, because you're touching so many organizations nowadays? I feel curious to know what's going on.
Yeah, very much what you are seeing. Very much what you are seeing. So much in 2021. It's been 18 months. It's COVID. It is social justice. It is a democracy. It is racial justice. All of that happening at once. Plus wars and violence that erupted during that time, which you all have been experiencing. This is a moment of change, and everybody feels it. And I keep going back to what Ronit was asking before. What we are seeing is everyone is craving a way to do something different. And because it's not the normal systems, we go back to the normal systems. But everyone I talk to, no matter where, is craving something that will lead us. They know it's not working over here, but they don't have something to go to over here. And I am seeing that absolutely everywhere. And it is happening in different ways in different countries, given what is going on both politically and socially in those countries. But for instance, obviously in the US and in Britain, in the UK, we're seeing a lot of social and racial justice issues. In other parts of the world that are deeply affected by climate change, we are seeing it as climate justice. The fact that so often climate change is affecting people of low income, poor people, more than it's affecting rich people who can move. There's so many different issues that are local, but the same question is coming up over and over and over again. We can't keep doing things the way we did them, but we don't know what to go to. And that seems to be the theme I'm hearing.
Thank you. And Einat is asking here a question. Yes, Einat.
Yeah, it's less than a question. It's just to add something. I'm doing B2B digital researches, and the method that I'm using can also be used for this, let's say also for Liron's challenge, what she asked. And when I'm doing a digital research, so first of all, I'm looking at the competitors and then on the ecosystem. And maybe if I was Liron, so I could take an Excel, okay, practically, really most practically as it can, make an Excel and put on, I don't know, 2, 3 competitors, one small size, peer 1, peer 2, peer 3, I mean like that, and study, go into their websites and understand what are they offering to their audiences, And so once Hildy just mentioned that you ask them, you can ask them to collaborate or ask them some questions, but once you do ask them and you connect with them, so ask them the backstage question of how and not the what. The what you can prepare on your Excel. And also besides of the competitors, so go to the ecosystem, which also I think you also mentioned it, because the ecosystem is the other organizations that they're not competitors, but they're giving the ecosystem, they're helping others to do that. And it could be very beneficial.
Very, very much. Thank you for that, Einat. It raises that second question that I had said, which is, what can we accomplish together? And one of the things I would suggest is look at the people who you used to think of as your competitors and think of them now as your friends. A question that I love is, who else cares about what we care about? Who else cares about what we care about? And I am so often asked about creating the future, the organization I am with. Who is your competition and how are you different? Those are the marketing questions, right? We've all heard them. Who is your competition and how are you different? And I tell people, we don't have competition. And it's not because we're so great, we don't have, no. It is because we don't see people as competition. We see them as collaborators. We see them as people who care about the same things we care about. And I don't want to know how we're different. I want to know how we're the same so that we can collaborate. So by asking, using that word competitors, we buy into that old system that we're fighting with each other, which is one more reason we don't accomplish anything. And so the more we can look at, I would take what you said, Einat, and make them formerly known as competitors. Who are the people who are doing what we do? Who are the people who care about what we care about? And what can we accomplish together? And it could just be sharing resources. It doesn't have to be collaborating at the mission. It could just be, we all use a van and we all need the van, but some of us need it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and some of us need it at 10 in the morning. It could be as simple as that. But really that whole focus of what can we accomplish together? Getting back to Liron, the question on talking to foundations, I encourage foundations to please add another question or two to their grants. And that question being, who are you already sharing resources with? What do you have that you can share? Get them thinking about that because they know who has what. Foundation, if every one of you apply to a foundation, look at all the information foundations have. They know all of this. So getting them to be able to say, oh, you know who you need a van and you only need it a few hours a day? That organization over there has a van, and those kinds of things.
Sometimes it's even not, it doesn't have to be money. I mean, resource that is, money or capitalized. It could be writing together an article and each one is putting in their own data. And because it's two kinds of data, so together they can do something great for both.
Wonderful, wonderful, absolutely. Absolutely, yes. But before we wrap up, Merav, I'm hoping that everyone can put into the chat, or if you'd like to share in just 1 or 2 minutes, very, very briefly, any reflections that you have on today, anything that is standing out to you from the conversation. And I encourage that in your meetings as well, because that brings us to a close. And it lets people say the things that they were thinking, but they didn't say out loud. And so if you could just share, if you want to share on the screen here with us, that would be great. If you want to share in the chat. But what is standing out to you from our conversation today?
Of course, you could also write in Hebrew if it's more comfortable.
Yes, of course. I want to share just...
רגע, דבורה wants to...
כן, רק שיתוף קטן בעברית ברשותכם. הדוגמאות ששמענו מהילדי מזכירות לי את הסיפור המפורסם על שני אנשים שונים שבאו לאותו מקום, שניהם צריכים תפוז, סליחה, שניהם צריכים לימון, ויש רק לימון אחד במקום הזה, והם רבים ביניהם מי יקבל את הלימון. כשהם מבררים את הצרכים, מסתבר שאחד צריך את המיץ, והשני צריך את הקליפה, ובעצם הם יכולים להתחלק בלימון אחד. אז זה אחד הדברים המרכזיים שאני לוקחת
Hildy Dvora said that it reminds her of a story of two people who wanted a lemon, and there was only one lemon, but when they started to discuss and figure things out, one actually needed the fruit inside and the other needed
peel.
The peel.
Very much, very much. Thank you.
Someone else would like to share with us something?
Just so I want to make sure I understand, you do not accept any concept of competition or competitors in the social.
Well, and here's the deal. Again, that question of what we really want is a world that works for everybody. And if you're competing for the goal of
just a minute.
There we go. If you are competing to get to Mars first, and you're competing in a race for the end result, great. You know, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson are all competing. Who's going to get to Mars first? Awesome. But when we're competing for the means to do our work, that puts us into fear. And we are competing right now for the ability to sustain our work. And that is horrible. That gets in the way. Our competing for the right to save people's lives, that makes no sense. Our competing for the fact that I am saving 20 lives and you are saving 20 lives, and who's saving those lives best, we're never going to save anybody. And so that is where competition makes absolutely no sense. It is the opposite of what we want to see. We want to see it working for everybody, and that's where competition makes no sense. And it's forced competition. We would not compete if we were not forced to do so. We would work together. We want to work together. And we're forced to compete with each other. Does that make sense, Ronnie? Okay.
Yes, it's interesting because I'm running examples through my head, and but we have to wrap up, so I don't want to take everybody's time.
Yes.
We have. I think it's a mindset of sometimes the way you save lives and the way I save lives is different. My ideology is different for what is saving the life, what is more important. And that makes the competition different, I think, than just fighting over resources. So I think in the long term, everybody would love to see that we are working together, but in the short term, we find differences, and that makes... And
imagine if all of those three ideological differences came together in one room and said, we all want to save children, and we have three different ways of doing it. What can we accomplish together that we can't accomplish on our own? And that's where the power is. I want to just, before we leave, I want to thank you all. This has been, it is early morning for me. It has been the best start to my day. And if you have questions, we're going to share the slides with you. And if you have questions, please send me questions. And Merav, you can share my email with folks. I am here.
Of course. I wanted to raise up the end slide, but it's just saying thank you very much, Hildy, for this open conversation, very courageous, and I feel that we need this way of thinking, and to hear also those voices, because we all feel very tensed and very, it's a tough situation for all the organizations, especially in Israel. And really, I thank also Tal and Orna and Liron and Osnat, of course, and Ronit. And really, I wish all of us to see it different, to use the muscle, to share and collaborate for doing good for our community. So thank you very much, Hildy.
Thank you, Merav.
I would like to
נקבל
say...
את ההקלטה? נקבל את ההקלטה גם?
כן. I would like just to say a couple of words about our next session, okay? So this will be in Hebrew, Hildy, I'm sorry.
Hildy, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care of yourself. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
אז זהו, אחרי שבעצם אני חושבת שכולנו ככה קיבלנו איזושהי מחשבה חדשה, שאלה, ואנחנו רוצים לחשוב איך זה יוביל אותנו לתוצאות יותר חיוביות. רק רציתי להגיד שב4 לאוגוסט המפגש שלנו הבא, והוא ייתן לכם אפילו ערך כפול, ידבר על 2 תפקידים משמעותיים של דירקטור חברתי, גם אחד באספקט של ניהול תהליכי בקרה מקצועיים, והשני ביכולת להוביל טרנספורמציה דיגיטלית. אם לא דיברנו על זה היום, אז זה בעצם היה פתיח למפגש הבא. אתם מוזמנים להירשם גם למפגש בודד, אבל רובכם פה עשיתם בחוכמה ונרשמתם לסדרה כולה, אז קיבלתם עוד מפגש מתנה. אז שיהיה לנו קיץ בריא, תוסס, שנשנה את העתיד. We will create the future, I hope. Each one of us.
אמן.
תודה רבה.
גם.